What is it you want, Barry? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dying times here.
Come with me if you want to live.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
The Force will be with you, always.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to 20th Century Geek. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and we are going back out to the island, to the desert island. That's right, we've got somebody in who's going to be telling me the 3 comics they would take to their desert island. I'm joined by Max Byrne, one of the many people producing fantastic content for Comics in Motion. Max, how you doing? You all right, mate?
I am great, Scott. Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. It's a huge honour. I've been a fan of your show for a good while now, since I think the first episode I heard of yours was the Rocky retrospective you did a year or two ago.
Okay, yes.
Christmas before last, I seem to remember listening to it. Christmas shopping with it in my ears a couple of years ago. And listened ever since, so I am honoured beyond measure to be on. Thank you.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you for the compliment. No, it's been many good retrospectives. The Rocky one was a cracker.
It was.
But yeah, no, you started your own. You obviously write for DC Comic News, and obviously working with Comics in Motion as well. So do you want to tell people about your podcast as well and what you do on yours?
Yeah, sure. The show's called Mandatory Marvel and DC. As we're recording this, episode 13 has just dropped today, actually, so go and check it out. And every show is basically me and a guest, and we just spend an hour or so discussing a classic book or classic story arc from either Marvel or DC, be what it may. It's always a choice of the guest as to what we discuss, because it's, best if it's something that's dear to their heart. So I don't have any say. The guests hold all the cards, so we just chat about it. We've done, like I said, 13 episodes now, a good mix of Marvel and DC, some classic stuff on there like Marvel Civil War, DC Kingdom Come, The Killing Joke, The Judas Contract. So if it's a big 2 comic and it's a big hitting storyline, then chances are we'll cover it at some point. So, hopefully people give it a chance and enjoy it.
Yeah, should do. Go check it out. It's fantastic. I think you've done some cracking stuff on there. Like you say, you've done some big hitters. You've done Watchmen, you've done Killing Joke, and so some really, like you say, it's going to be interesting as you get to a point of, once you've done the big hitters, you are going to get to people's favorite storylines and stuff like that. So it's going to be some interesting. It'll be good. Yeah, great podcast on all podcast catcher. So go find it. But today you are bringing me some comics. Your Desert Island Comics, and as you said, sort of yourself, you're more of a trade paperback man, sort of a collector's edition, which I totally understand. But that's kind of why I like doing this, because it sort of challenges people to pick. It's easy to pick an arc, isn't it? Because you can sort of sometimes go, oh yeah, I love that book, and you go, oh, but what's your favourite issue? Either or a one shot, that sort of thing. So it's a bit more snappy. So, Max, what have you chosen and brought with you today?
Okay, so the 3 I've gone for, I've kind of tried to spread this at a range out. So I've chosen 1 DC, 1 Marvel, and 1 something else. So in chronological release order, the ones I've picked, I've gone for the 1991 Dark Horse release Terminator story entitled One Shot. And then I've gone further forward in time to 1994 for issue 1 of the Marvel series simply entitled Marvels by Kurt Busiek and Alex Ross, so issue 1 of that. And then bringing it almost all the way up to date to 2016, I've gone for the DC Universe Rebirth expanded one-shot by Jeff Johns.
Yeah, so it's a real... it covers a real gamut, actually, of different things. And as luckily, I had all of them to hand, which was fantastic in varying ways. But yeah, what made you sort of, because like I say, I like the fact you picked the Marvel and DC, but sort of, was there anything that sort of directed your hand towards any of these in particular? Or was it just a sort of like, oh yeah, that's something I'd like to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I was obviously when you set me the task of coming up with 3 to when you very kindly invited me on, I was thinking, right, I better get to this now and sort of start perusing the bookshelf. And I was always going to pick DC Universe Rebirth #1 because for me, it's probably the most significant single issue of the last 5 years. But obviously, we'll discuss that in greater detail later on as we sort of move through the years. And for Marvel, I just wanted to pick something that sort of encompassed the Marvel universe as opposed to something specifically about a character. Kind of in the way the DC one I've just mentioned is. It's not specifically character related, it's the whole universe. I'm a sucker for a big crossover issue. So, and anything, again, we'll get a bit more detail, but anything with Alex Ross art in it immediately sort of has my attention and makes me want to just pick it up and pore over it time after time. So that was always going to be a winner. And then obviously with the first one, the Terminator one, the Dark Horse, I deliberately obviously wanted to pick something that wasn't one of the big 2 for a change. And I'm an absolute sucker for stuff that sort of expands upon existing media. I love licensed properties being made into comic book form where they'll take like a beloved film or a TV show and put it out there and expand the universe and the mythology. So it was always one I was going to gravitate towards.
Awesome. Yeah. No, I have to admit, I've really enjoyed going back to all of these. And you say about Alex Ross art, and we'll get into it, but it's so much special. I think there are certain, like say, superstar, rock star artists and stuff in the comics industry, and Alex Ross he's in that top tier, isn't he? Really?
Yeah.
Especially, doesn't do interiors often anymore, but
no.
It's So The Marvels is a great book. Okay, so let's go all the way back. I've got it here. I've got my big hardcover. The Dark Horse recently got their special editions to celebrate. So I've got it. Obviously contains what they've now called the Tempest, but was originally just called the Terminator. 4-part series, and then One Shot. So yes, let's start talking about that. So come on, you can start. It's your choice. So what are your thoughts then on One Shot if we get started on it, and we'll start talking about the story as well.
Well, like I said, I love licensed stuff, and I love mythology. I'm a sucker for things that tie into pre-existing worlds. I mean, when this came out in 91, I believe it was the same year that Terminator 2 was out, wasn't it, at the cinemas? So this was probably the absolute peak year in terms of popularity for the Terminator franchise. I don't believe it's ever been as hot or as popular as it was the year T2 came out.
Or as good, let's be honest.
Well, yes, I'll be honest with you. Yeah, as much as I love all the Terminator films. I really do. Even the crap ones, I still love. And I thought Dark Fate was a lot better than a lot of people give it credit for last year. But yeah, 91 was the peak of the franchise with Terminator 2 because that's the one that was easily the most commercially successful and critically acclaimed, I would say. And it was, even to this day, it's nearly 30 years on, it's regarded as a sort of apex of Schwarzenegger's career. Certainly for that franchise. Arguably James Cameron's best film, but I suppose that's between that and Aliens, at least for me, I would say. But yeah, so this book is really good because what it does is it takes the events of the film, but doesn't sort of re-depict them, but sort of depicts an event that was going on literally alongside the events of the first film with another Sarah Connor, where obviously in the film you saw when Arnie goes back, he starts knocking off, for want of a better word, eliminating Sarah Connors via the phone book before he gets to the Sarah Connor, and obviously we know he's ultimately unsuccessful in his mission. But this is concurrently occurring, and the same timeline was another robot was sent back, a female one this time, to do basically the same job and eliminate other Sarah Connors. So this is, it never stops, this book. As soon as it starts, as soon as the narrative kicks in, it literally never takes a breath for its whole run. It's just a great read. It's a great romp. It's violent. I love it. Are you a fan?
I am, actually. It's one of those that I read years ago. I picked this up in a charity shop many, many years ago. And I mean, the first thing is I love it. I love Matt Wagner's art. I've always been a fan of like his painted art and stuff. It's quite blocky at times, and it's sort of it just reminds me of sort of like he did a couple of things for smaller comics, and they're always really good. So I enjoy the art, but also like reading it, I've forgotten how good and how weird the story is. it hints at everything that's going on. Like, throughout the book, there are sort of like hints of the the main story. But this whole thing sort of just goes on its side, and then you're introduced to all kinds of different things. Like, you said there's a female Terminator sent back way before T3 jumped on that bandwagon. So they weren't the first to do it.
No.
But more than that, you get this sort of like older dude who's retired from the police force, has a pet monkey, which for no apparent reason, but it's still quite cool. And it turns out that, like you said, the twist is that he's also from the future and was actually sent back to before all this happened, like 10 or so years before the Terminators arrived, and has been there to sort of help and support and guide Sarah Connor sort of from a distance, or acts to protect her. And you sort of think, oh wow, that's, again, it's time travel. These things can be done. It's quite an interesting twist, really, and the way they deal with it, really, as well, is it's all addressed. He says, oh yeah, Kyle Reese has gone back and he's with Sarah Connor now, and they're like, well, why didn't you go? And he's like, because I sort of saw there was somebody else in trouble, so Kyle's got that one. I'll jump into this. And I think that's really cool. So yeah, no, I've really enjoyed this. You say, it is a romp. Like, it starts and doesn't stop.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, yeah, I think as a one shot, it's really good. I like the fact it's called One Shot. It is a one shot, but then obviously that plays out more in the finale as well.
Yeah, it does.
I mean, what are your thoughts about the way that sort of the art in this is portrayed? What are your thoughts on Wagner's art?
I love it. I think at times it's almost like abstract, avant-garde, the way he depicts things. He doesn't depict things in a realist manner, that's for sure. I mean, when we get to speaking about Alex Ross and his sort of almost photorealistic style, this is sort of the other end of the spectrum, isn't it? But there's nothing wrong with that. It's horses for courses, and there's almost like a sort of a futurist quality to it. It's really off the wall at times. At times it's quite conventional when he's sort of got just figures in a frame, but then there's other, like the action stuff. It's incredibly stylized and really vivid as well, and it works well with the color scheme, because the colors are at times vivid, but at times as well really sort of washed out and grey. It all contributes towards this sort of bleak situation that the characters find themselves in. I love the art. I'm a big fan of it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with the colour scheme, because that's something that's so fascinating about this book. Is the majority, like the vast majority, is painted in like browns and greys and beige, and it's not like it's not like a wash with colour. The whole thing's very muted and very sort of, like you said, washed out, and then all of a sudden you do get like these flashes of colour, and especially in the action. I mean, there's a couple of scenes I'm just looking through now, like straight away, as soon as there's a gunfire, like it's a big ball of flame, like it's a proper. And even now, there's a 2-page spread. Everything's sort of small, and it's sort of I'm trying to find it now. Here you go. So it's sort of like preceded by a chase. Sarah Connor, not the Sarah Connor, but our Sarah Connor for the story, is in a taxi and she's been chased down. And even the car chase itself is what covers like maybe 2.5 pages. It's fine, it's good. It's sort of, you get the idea of momentum. And as you said, sort of done by sort of like in a sort of surrealist way. It sort of stops, and then you get this page of triangular panels depicting sort of like an oncoming something, and then there's just this massive 2-page spread that's like all darks, but with these like yellows and orange and reds and sort of all these gunfires and sort of the flaming eyes of the Terminator. And you're like, oh my god, this is gorgeous! Like it just comes out of nowhere. I think it's phenomenal. I think the art in it is absolutely phenomenal.
Definitely. It just works really well with the story and the situation, and the story itself is great as well, because our heroine, in inverted commas, is actually pretty terrible person as you sort of delve into the story. In a way, she kind of gets what's coming to her because she was going to do exactly the same thing to her literally newlywed husband.
Yeah, that's the thing I find most bizarre about this is, like, you know, apart from the guy that's sort of from the future anyway.
Yeah, Ruggles. Yeah,
Ruggles. Yeah, great name.
Ellis Ruggles. What a name.
Yeah, he's the only sort of like legitimately sort of good person.
Yeah.
Everybody else is sort of like varying levels of just, like you said, vile. Even so, it's basically sort of this Sarah Connor. She was originally called Sarah Doyle, something like that.
Sarah Lang.
Sarah Lang, that's it. And she's now married. She's married someone who has the sort of the surname Connor.
Yeah.
And this guy's like an artist, like, you know, they call him like a starving artist kind of thing. But it turns out he's got a fortune hidden away. So she only married him so that she and her lover could then kill him off and claim the fortune.
Yeah.
So you're like, all right, so you're vile. And then when you sort of get to know the artist guy, he's still like a bit of a pretentious prick as well. Yeah. So it's like, it's bizarre that, like, it's quite brave for you to go, oh no, you've got to have the sympathy of these people, or at least you've got to, you know, empathize with these people. And, you know, it's sort of like you're supposed to follow them on their journey. But it's quite hard, isn't it, really? Because you think, oh.
Yeah, it's hard to root for her because you're supposed to, basically, in the story. You've got this evil cyborg from the future who's literally after this woman merely because of her name. You know, like in the first film, Arnie guns down 2 or 3 other Sarah Connors who have got nothing to do with the future and saving mankind. They're just literally victims of their surname. They pay for it with their lives, with their names. And this woman's no different. She's literally just become Connor by the fact that she just married Mr. Michael Connor is his name. Yeah. But because she's dreadful and was planning to kill him, like you say, kill him, take his money, which he lied to her about anyway, he doesn't know she knows about it, and basically run off with her other fella, you can't root for her as such, because you kind of almost read this and want her to get caught and gunned down because she kind of deserves it. You know, you're kind of just hoping that her husband, who, even when he finds out about her plot with her other half, he's like, oh well, I still love you, so, you know, let's work through it. You know, let's survive this situation, and then we'll work through it. Love can grow. Which, you know, what an absolute buffoon he is. So he kind of deserves to suffer as well, even though he ultimately is, along with Peanut the monkey, he's the one who's sort of still around at the end. So in a way, this Sarah Connor, although you're supposed to sort of, in a way, want her to survive and root for her and hope she escapes and somehow manages to destroy this robot that's trying to kill her, you actually think, well, you're an absolute piece of work and you deserve it. You deserve it. So I actually want this. So that's why I like this story, because it's kind of like it's like the Dark Mirror version of the first film, where you're really rooting for Sarah Connor and you want her to win and kill Arnie and ride off into the sunset with Michael Biehn because you're rooting for her. This one, you're like, kill her, get rid of her. She doesn't deserve to be alive anyway. So that's why I like this story, because, like you said, it's such a bold choice by James Robinson, the writer, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's the thing. Like, you make a really good point there. This is almost like the antithesis of the Terminator, because Sarah Connor in that, you know, is depicted as sort of like a young, you know, she's a waitress and she's young, naive, and fresh for the world. And in this, like you say, well, it's not revealed straight away. It's slowly depicted, you know, sort of like in the first sort of section of the book. Because the first section of the book is just her, you know, on the run. And it's only when she goes to sort of take shelter at her lover's place that you find out that they are planning to kill him, her husband. And that's when you're like, oh, like that sort of like, you know, the act 2 of it, you're like, oh, right, okay, that's taking a left turn. And it is, it's sort of, I mean, to you know, spoilers for the end, obviously the Terminator succeeds as well. Like, they defeat the Terminator, but then the Terminator also managed to sort of, they're on a boat, Ruggles shoots the Terminator with as he says, one shot. It's like a gun that is sort of like, he's used present day technology, or actually 80s technology, to you know, forge this gun that can kill a Terminator. Yeah, and he does it, but it doesn't quite work because he gets one sort of thing off. and drags her into the sea.
Yeah.
And so it drowns her. And again, like
Yeah.
you say, you end up with these sort of mixed feelings at the end because you're like, well, she was like you said, she was a piece of work. She was planning on killing this guy. And the Terminator's been successful. So I'm sort of split on it. So it's quite just to leave it on that note as well, you're a bit like, oh, wow, okay.
Yeah. It's like a wonderfully self-contained story, isn't it? Because the Terminator ultimately, like you said, succeeds in its mission. Its mission was to kill her, mission accomplished, but dies in the process, so it can't then go on to whatever its secondary objective was, I guess, if it had one. And that's it, isn't it? And so the husband, who's literally just been through the night from hell, he found out that his wife, who he was in love with, who he just married, actually wanted to kill him and only wanted him for his money that he didn't know she knew about. Then he's just had to survive being chased through the city by a murderous cyborg from the future, and then said wife has literally been murdered before his eyes, and as is Ruggles was mortally wounded at the end as well. So he's just left with him and Ruggles, his monkey. I mean. Yeah. Where'd you go from there as that guy? I would quite like to have seen where he went from there. Did he go insane, or did he become like Sarah Connor does, I guess, between 1 and 2 films, where she sort of toughens up and decides to try and take the fight to Skynet. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, what becomes of him? I want to know.
That's it. I almost wanted, like you say, a little epilogue that just sort of says, like 2 years later or whatever, and has him doing something because. But then again, he's such a wet sponge that you probably wouldn't, No. I mean, again, sort of looking at the finale, like, that Ruggles shoots the Terminator. It has like this electrified moment. It then falls down, clang, dead, as you sort of see it. And he sort of like, her husband sort of says, like, as you said, oh, look, yeah, I know you now know about the money. You can have it. I'm not interested. You can have the money. I love you. I want to be with you. And she's sort of like, for a second, she's like, oh, okay. Then she turns a gun on him. Yeah. And so it's a really hammer home. It's just like, no, she's actually just an absolute piece of shit and sort of like not to be trusted. It's a real, it's bizarre.
It is.
Definitely stands up. Well. It works really well. I think it stands up in that sort of, like you said, in the fact it is a one-shot, a self-contained little story that it just seems to exist in the Terminator mythos. It doesn't have any. It'd be interesting to see what does happen to Michael Connor, but there's no, future timeline sort of like, implications. It doesn't impact on Sarah's story. There's no loot. There's no holes where you're like, oh, well, that's crazy. That should have been in the film. No, it's nice and self-contained.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it feels very much like it belongs in the world of the film, but like you said, it's in its own sort of pocket of that film universe and doesn't in any way detract from the events of the film or lead you to think, well, if that happened then does that affect the timeline of the film? None of that. Apart from maybe the Terminator chassis going down to the bottom of the ocean, and maybe one day a submarine could have picked it up, like they do with the arm from Arnie in the first one, and sort of reverse engineer that to build the kind of technology. I mean, it's, if you're nitpicking, you could say, well, there's a Terminator skeleton at the bottom of the bay there. Exactly. Yeah, so someone could have stumbled across it in years to come. But aside from that, I just think it's a really great, tense, action-packed, great story with interesting characters who are sort of incredibly unsympathetic, and yet you're still expected to root for them against this killing machine that's mercilessly hunting them down. I find myself caring more for the poor sods who are killed in the crossfire in the hotel hotel lobby and the hotel elevator. They just get blown away because they're just up there.
I do like that scene when sort of like Sarah Connor's like literally got like a gun barrel in her face, and there's a bunch of old people step out the lift and get like wiped out. It's wonderfully violent and stuff. It's good fun. I'd definitely recommend it if you're a Terminator fan. Oh yeah. I mean, it almost also plays to me, one of the reasons I really enjoyed it as well, it plays to me a little bit like, that sort of Tales from the Crypt, or like in 2000 AD, they used to have sort of things called future shocks. And it's like this idea of just a short tale with a bit of a sting in with a sting in the tail that sort of, I really enjoyed that. and so it was good to go back to it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a great story.
So should we jump forward to one of the big two. So jumping forward sort of a couple of years, and we're going to address Marvels. Now we're going to talk about issue number 1, but I'm sure it'll sort of the scope will creep a little bit to cover some of the other bits. Yeah. It's a 4-book series, although there is an issue 0, which is a bit of a prologue.
Yeah.
Written by, as I said, you said Kurt Busiek, and art. I can't even say sort of drawn, but art by Alex Ross. Mm-hmm. Do you want to give an overview of the plot, like what this is about, and we'll go from there?
Yeah. Well, it's set over a number of decades. I think it starts in the late 1930s and goes up to about the mid-70s. And it is the story fundamentally of just a normal guy. I think he's a news photographer, a guy called Phil Sheldon. And, you know, it's his life story between those time periods. But his life story is directly sort of played out across all the major events in the Marvel universe across those years. So obviously starting in sort of the advent of the original Human Torch and his conflicts with Namor across the city, and seeing how that impacts the everyday people. And that's just issue 1, but then like you said, it goes on, and you see the introduction of Captain America during World War II. You go through the 60s and the introduction of the X-Men and sort of the anti-mutant feeling, and all the sort of birth of the Marvel universe in the 60s, where suddenly heroes are coming out of into existence left, right, and center, and you see it all through the prism of this ordinary man, and everything that happens is from his viewpoint. There's no sort of cut into Avengers HQ where, you know, the heroes sort of pontificate on what's happening in the world. No, it's all this guy's life, and they're sort of they're revolving around him rather than sort of him revolving around them, if that makes sense. So it's a great book. It's a nice twist on a Marvel Universe story, in that it's not about any of the main hitters of the Marvel Universe, although they are so present in the story. It's great.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. Their presence is, to put it one way, I suppose. This first issue in particular is about acceptance, and how they sort of, you know, this age of superheroes. It starts in like 1939, I think. I'm just looking at the first page. And you get great things. There's some great little nods in it. The first page includes not just the sort of the young newsman, you know, photographer, isn't it? Sort of Sheldon. You then get one of his fellow reporters who's quite ambitious, a young J. Jonah Jameson, sat with him, which is really cool. But I love this issue because it's so about acceptance. You know, it's this thing of like, there's this awe and, oh my God, like, you know, the fear that comes with the first time they see the Human Torch, and then he appears on the street and all this other stuff. And people's sort of different opinions, that some are sort of like, oh no, these are amazing at first. Like, you know, your main character's a bit like reluctant, but acknowledges them as sort of like quite impressive. He calls them the Marvels, like, you know, that's his name he gives them. But then throughout it, you get these little nods of people saying something like, yeah, they're freaks. They belong in cages. This isn't right. They should be stopped. And it's, I love how it plays with this idea of sort of where things like this can sit on people's radar, because there's the entire section of Namor and Human Torch, the first Human Torch, fighting across New York, and you see them sort of fighting on the bridge and all around the city and in the harbor and all this other stuff. And then sort of there's this acknowledgement of like there's this I don't know, is she like an army Betty Dean, a policewoman, makes them compromise and see sort of sense, and in doing so, sort of like they stop fighting, and even like the main character's like, and that's it. There's no repercussions. They just sort of bugger off, and like you know, there's no thought to the damage they seem to have done. We just sort of carry on and we fix things. But then when it goes to war, it highlights that the human. You know, that's when you introduce Captain America, and you find out that, like, you know, the Human Torch and Namor are fighting together against the Nazis. And there's a great scene in the cinema where they've seen this newsreel of the Namor and Human Torch fighting the Japanese, and all that stuff that's gone before is gone. this acknowledgement of them being a threat to humanity and this other stuff. All of a sudden, they're our boys fighting the good fight, and it all becomes very jingoistic.
Yeah.
I just kind of like how this is. It's, as you say, it's not about the superheroes. They're there, and they are definitely a presence, and in many cases, they're a shadow looming over things. But it's just how people would react, and it feels incredibly heartfelt from Kurt Busiek.
Yeah, it does. By all means, it's if you can think how the world would react in a real. I mean, this is done in a very realistic kind of manner. It's not done as a fantasy story. It's kind of how the world, especially back then as well, in the late 30s, early 40s, when we were living in sort of less enlightened, maybe less educated times, and they'd react. If all of a sudden, I mean, you probably would still be the same way now, to be honest with you. But if all of a sudden, superpowered, godlike beings appeared from seemingly nowhere and started, knocking the hell out of each other across the city and leaving a trail of destruction in the wake, there'd be abject panic and fear and like, oh my God, is this the end of the world? What's happening? What on earth is this? That would literally happen. It's not like they're not there to sort of make a judgment. It's just about people's reaction and real people's lives, and how one man who is there's nothing pretty exceptional about the main character, the Sheldon character. He's got a good job, and he's at least at the start of it, he's sort of romancing his lady who we know he'll go on to marry and raise a family with. But he's in the grand scheme of the Marvel universe, he's a pretty unexceptional guy. But literally, he's in the thick of everything that happens, every significant milestone in the Marvel universe over the 40-something years that this book covers. He's right there, and it's just a really well sort of thought out concept. I mean, DC did something very similar a few years later. I think it was about 2005. They did a story that was almost not verbatim, but a very similar concept. Legacies, that's the one. Yeah. Where again, it was one man's story, wasn't it? Just not a superhero, just a normal guy like you and me. I can't remember what he did for a living, and again, it started in I think probably the 40s or the 30s, and with the JSA, and literally all showed it was his life story, but all the key events of the DC universe were there alongside it. The death of Superman and Crisis on Infinite Earths, Batman getting his back broken by Bane, and all this, the Nightfall stuff. It was all there. So, and I can understand why they sort of copied it, because it's a great concept, and it's not a direct sort of bit of plagiarism, but the concept works really well. I like that. I like to see normal people's stories against the backdrop of this uber sort of heightened concept of a comic book universe. It works great.
Well, I think the thing is, I totally agree, because I love the fact that there's this concept in there. The one thing in this issue, and this is that thing of how things age and how you perceive things. There's an event in the first book, and it's good because it's sort of, he comments on it as well. Is after the war, at some point, or even during the war, I think it is, Namor stops fighting, the Japanese and the Nazis and that sort of thing, and declares war on all of humanity.
Yeah.
And you see this thing where it's announced, they're at a dance. It comes over as almost like a memo that gets sent out to him, and then this idea of them, like, he just sat waiting, he's become this unstoppable force, and he's around the world. Like, okay, he's now in, he's in, what do they say? Sort of, he's in Africa, he's in Berlin, he's now in Canada, and you keep hearing this thing like them saying like, oh, he won't come here, he can't come to America, and then all of a sudden it's like, no, he's here. We've got to evacuate. And he attacks New York with a tidal wave.
Yeah.
And then, like, literally, I mean, that sort of comes sort of, that's close to the end of the issue. But the final image of this book one is Namor, Human Torch with, what was it? Was it not called Kid Torch? No, it was
Toro was
Toro. That's it.
Which is junior sidekick. Yeah.
And then you get Cap and Bucky, and you get a bunch of other sort of like World War II, heroes sort of going in on a Nazi stronghold. And there's Namor, and it is this sort of like, oh, it's all forgotten. It was talked out, and I'm like, yeah, but if that was happened today, and they've said, oh yeah, we're going to evacuate or whatever, but that's like, I don't know, billions of dollars worth of damage. And it's sort of just this notion. I like the fact it addresses this notion of like, they seem to destroy things, but we also seem to forgive them quite quickly. Which I do think is quite interesting.
It's a strange one, isn't it? Because, like you said, that image of the tidal wave attacking the city, it is literally like something out of a film like 2012 or The Day After Tomorrow, where you see these huge tsunamis, or San Andreas, where these huge tsunamis appear and decimate major cities. I mean, and like you said, how do you go from doing that and basically declaring war on the world, and like you said, going on like almost a world tour of all these different places and laying waste, attacking Africa, Berlin, Canada, now New York, to at the end of the book fighting the Nazis with the invaders, and it's like, how do you reconcile that? What I suppose you're sort of left to your own conclusions, really, because again, you only see events of the book through Sheldon's eyes. After this particular scene, because he gets, obviously, when he's sort of on a rooftop watching the fight and the destruction, he gets hit with like an errant brick, which sort of loses one eye, so he wears an eye patch for the rest of the story. So you never quite get to see. All the only comment you see is his comment saying, when I woke up, it was all over. In more ways than one, reparations were being made and the submariner was on the side of the angels again. But how was he on the side of the angels? How did he make amends for what he did? Is it just because Japan attacked Pearl Harbor and it was like, we need everyone, all hands to the pump to win World War II, and we'll forget about it, we'll pardon all
that's almost how it feels. Is that thing of like, oh well, the reparations you can pay is you can join our side against the enemy. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, you say about this being a good representation of what would really happen. It would not surprise me in the slightest. Any Western government who's like, actually, do we want to be pissing this guy off, or do we want a superpowered sort of, like he can fly, he's got super strength, he's invulnerable. I think we want him on our side. So, all right, we'll let that slide for now, and, then we can go to, have him covering the war. I just thought it's interesting, sort of that, and that probably would happen to some degree. But then, is it the same as saying, and this is going to be really bad, but is it the same as saying, like, Osama bin Laden, you sort of orchestrated one of the greatest attacks on America, but we've also got this problem with somebody else, and we think you'd be good on our side. I don't know. It sort of feels a bit like, where would you draw the line?
Yeah. I suppose the difference is you never see name. I mean, I would imagine then the collateral damage probably there was, but you never see anyone die as a result of his actions. That's the difference, isn't it? The only person you see him directly come into conflict with is the Human Torch. He doesn't sort of, other than sort of people trying to shoot at him and him, sort of maybe throwing a police car out the way while they're shooting at him while the bullets are bouncing off him. You don't see him sort of deliberately trying to kill anyone. And then you wonder, with that huge tidal wave, did they evacuate the city in time? So although he's, like you said, it's billions of dollars in property destruction and a city half leveled, but did they get people out in time or did they not? So it's one of them. Could you compare him to bin Laden, who's committed an act of abject terrorism? I'm not sure, but I know what you mean, though. It's kind of a strange one, isn't it, how he can suddenly go from that to being fighting the good fight in World War II, having literally just seemingly days or weeks before tried to destroy a major American city. It's like, how do you balance the scales?
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those problems I've always had in comics, and I know it's something not to have a problem with, because these are comics and these things happen, but villains becoming, I wouldn't say heroes, but joining, as I said, the side of the angels, is often a bit of a hard pill to swallow. And Namor is a man, a man unto himself. I mean, I wouldn't say Namor has ever really been on the side of the angels. I think Namor serves his own purposes more than anybody's.
Yeah.
But when like Magneto becomes, on the side of the good and stuff, there's always that thing where you're like, yeah, but he did do all these other things. Like, it's a real sort of, like you said, it's trying to get that balance. But yeah, it's a fascinating notion, and the book itself, like you say, goes through the history of the Marvel Universe, introducing things like the Fantastic Four and the X-Men and Spider-Man and the rest of the Avengers and the escalation. And one of my favourite ones in the later issues is it introduces Galactus, and you have this massive sort of like shootout and battle between the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, and Galactus, and you sort of like. One of the great things about it, much like with the progression of comics, is that escalation. You sort of like you have that thing with Namor and the Human Torch to begin with, and then it sort of goes up further to be, we're now introducing mutants, or now we're introducing people that have been sort of mutated by gamma rays and so on and so forth. Like it's a really well constructed book.
Yeah.
And that first issue is a real doozy. It really is. It lays those foundations really well.
It does. It just makes it feel like a real lived-in world, and especially back then as well, where the comic books of that era were very sort of, I don't want to say campy, but they weren't sort of the realistic kind of harder hitting books of more modern times, were they? They were a lot more innocent and a lot more hero stood with their hands on their hips, fighting crooks and saving America, truth, justice, the America way, and all the rest of it. But this, although it's set in that time period, and there is a certain innocence to some of the way some of the characters act, but it just feels like a lived-in real world and deals with the consequences of superhero conflict and things like that. It's just a really well put together story, I think. I care more for this Sheldon guy than I did the Sarah Connor of the previous comic, that's for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And the thing is, with this guy, like you say, he's incredibly grounded, and in often in these sort of things where you're trying to have something of this scope, sometimes things feel shoehorned in, or people have to make ridiculous decisions to in order to facilitate something. But everything in this feels, you go, yeah, I can understand why he's making that decision. I don't agree with all of his decisions, but I understand where he's coming from. And you go on this journey with him of, at first he literally splits from his fiance because he's like, look, how can I be a husband and father if in a world where there are these supermen and I can't protect you and the family? Like, it's a very sort of machoistic sort of early 1920 or early 20th century sort of worldview. And eventually, like, as he comes round and sort of learns more, and he sort of he sees the sort of the different pieces, when it comes to the end of it, there's almost like a realization of like, this isn't going away.
Exactly.
This isn't sort of a flash in the pan. We're in war, we're doing this, we're doing that. I have to accept it. And if I'm going to accept it, then damn it, I'm going to be at the forefront.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think as well, it's like the introduction to Captain America, and he sees this guy who's like the red, white, and blue, a wonderful person for all intents and purposes, no dark side to that character. And I think it sort of sways him into thinking that, actually there is good in the world. And, although we've just come out of this, this conflict with Namor, and that's, like you said, he sort of breaks up with his fiancée because of it. He sort of rediscovers, it's that after he has the accident to lose his eye, he kind of rediscovers his sort of, in a perverse way, rediscovers his faith in the human race and humanity, because he sees that actually there are good marvels, for want of a better word, his terminology. So I think it's, it kind of acts as that spur to him. But he's a good character. As a lead character, he drives the plot really well, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's one of those, he is, and I love him. It's one of those things where, I don't know if you might know more than me, the book ends, as you said, sort of in the 70s, with him being sort of, I don't know, middle-aged-ish,
Yeah.
sort of, and there's a wonderful, at the very end of it, is him passing his camera on to his daughters, like a next generation. And the problem obviously with an ever stagnant timescale for comics is you could never, I'd love, did they ever do a sequel? Because I'd love to go back and go, here's Sheldon in his old age.
Yeah, going through like the 80s and the 90s and things like that. Yeah,
like him growing old and then looking down at his kids and seeing, his grandkids or whatever, and then having to sit and seeing them go through the dark era. Sort of all of a sudden, you got like these other superheroes. You've got Blade and Moon Knight and Werewolf by Night, and there's all these monsters start to appear and stuff in the late 70s. Like I think it'd be interesting to see how they deal with that.
Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah, I mean, I've just had a quick look actually just about that because I've never known if there was something that came after. And it says a sequel was not developed until 2008 with the release of something called Marvel's Eye of the Camera. But only Busiek was involved. Alex Ross didn't do the art for that, but it was still the same writer, Kurt Busiek.
Yeah.
And then after that, it says a single issue epilogue was released in late 2019 with both Busiek and Ross returning. So that somehow passed me by, but that's definitely what I'm going to seek out as soon as I've got a chance to. Because like you said, I want to know where he goes next. I want to, or at least see his view of, like you said, the darker side of things that was to come. When Frank Castle starts walking through the streets of New York, executing gangsters left, right, and centre, mass murdering people. People who deserved it, people who had it coming. Don't get me wrong, but still a mass murderer. How he sort of sees that, and does that affect his? We've just said he has that more positive mindset with when Cap comes along and sees the positivity and America and contributing to the Allied forces winning World War II. And it's like, well, would the way the Marvel Universe goes then sort of tip him back towards his attitude of, the world's screwed and what's the point? That would be really cool to see, wouldn't it?
Exactly. I'd love that. That's a really good point. Him having to reconcile this thing with, like you said about Captain America's, and seeing him in the early 40s, and him being able to sort of restore some faith that these Marvels can be good, to then sort of having to reconcile with the idea of, well, Captain America's still there and they're still doing this stuff, yet they are allowing the Punisher to go off and do this stuff.
Yeah.
What else happened in the 80s? Secret Wars and
the Infinity Saga as well. Yeah.
I mean, what was that year? It was 88, 87, 88, 89?
Something like that. Yeah. Because what if Sheldon was one of the people who got snapped out of existence, or his wife did, or his kids? How would that play out? Yeah.
If you just take it up to like the mid 90s or the mid to late 90s and give, or even up to say 2000, take it up to 2000, and then have him as an old man or something like that. There's some great stuff that. Oh, it'd be amazing to do that. I might have to check out the sequels though. I think Through the Camera though, isn't that just what was it called? Through the Lens.
Eye of the Camera.
Eye of the Camera.
Marvel's Eye of the Camera, and it was a 6-part limited series returning to Sheldon's perspective after his retirement. But like I said, no Alex Ross art, but obviously with the same writer. At least the narrative and the story should be consistent. But yeah, I'm gonna have to check that out.
I've not seen it, so I'm definitely going to check that out because it's a fascinating concept, and it's no wonder, like you say, that DC jumped on the bandwagon. We're like, oh, excellent idea. We'll do ours next.
Yeah. Well, that's a great read too, and it's all right. It is.
Yeah, Legacies is really good again, and it's a wonder because these have got such. And again, we'll get into the history of the DC universe in a minute, but they have got such sort of like deep histories between them that, like, it's sometimes really nice to get in there and to do something with that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's Marvel's number one. Marvel's a great book.
It is highly recommended.
Yeah. What I would say is I actually have it. I think you get it. Is and I've only got a few of them really, but Marvel's the Ultimate Graphic Novel Collection. That's is this Hachette? Does it Hachette?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I still collect them. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've got that version. This was obviously an early issue, and I love the fact in this one, just so for people that if they're looking for it, after each issue they do a bit of a commentary.
Yes.
And it's got a sketchbook at the back as well of Alex Ross, how he did his art and stuff.
Oh, it's
And
phenomenal, isn't it?
it's amazing. I mean, some of the special features, like, if you're going to do special features in a book, this is how you do it.
Yeah.
It's got interviews with Alex Ross, with Kurt Busiek, with other people commenting on it. Yeah, excellent edition. Absolutely excellent.
His process is fascinating as well. The way he uses real people to pose in the costumes and the positions that he wants to depict on the panel, and then he makes those photos. He uses his parents, stand-ins, his friends. He picked photos of himself, people he knows, and uses those as the basis to create these wonderfully hand-painted pictures. I mean, it's amazing that he was only 24 when this book came out. That, to me, is staggering.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, he was born in 1970, Alex Ross, and this came out in 94. So 24 years old and producing a piece of work like this is phenomenal. The fact that style of his that is so recognizable, isn't it? Anyone can look at his art and go, that's an Alex Ross picture, the fact that at as young an age as that, he had his style all finalized and down and so consistently brilliant. It's phenomenal. It's genius level art as far as I'm concerned.
I agree. If he was born 400 years earlier, he'd be a Renaissance master. He's just that level. I think it's because you mentioned before, one of the things the books you've done on mandatory Marvel and DC is Kingdom Come.
Yes,
and obviously done art by Alex Ross.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a couple of panels in that, and I've got the hardback edition of that. And again, it sort of shows some of the process in the back, and just some of the panels in that are beautiful. You can just look at them. I'm sorry, I just admire some of the artwork in that book and how he got there.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. So if you love art, definitely, you may not be a comic fan or not much of a comic fan, but check out Alex Ross. Just some of the work he's done. It's phenomenal. Okay, so we're now jumping well into the future. We're sort of leaving the 90s behind and jumping up to 2016.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be honest, DC trying to fix something that they were quite sure was broken. Is how I would put it. We're going to talk about the DC Universe Rebirth issue 1 or the One Shot.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this, but also on that general situation that they found themselves in between sort of 2011 and 2015 really with DC New 52.
Yeah. Well, I, generally speaking, really like the New 52. I know a lot of people didn't. I mean, don't get me wrong, there was parts of it I thought were dreadful. I thought the way they depicted Superman in that period was dreadful. I don't want to see Superman in jeans, which, jeans and a T-shirt and a bit of cloth around his neck, that's not Superman, I want to see the Kryptonian suit,
Yeah.
But I quite like New 52, but I think it sort of ties in for me personally is that the birth of the New 52 in 2011 was my jumping on point in terms of reading comics on a weekly basis. Prior to that, I'd sort of stopped. With life and things like that, would still, read trades and big stories and that. But in terms of the week to week continuity and what was actually going on in the universe, I was so far removed from it. So that was my stepping into the pool, so to speak. So for me, it holds a special place in my heart. But I can definitely see why people don't like it, because comic book fans basically don't like change. Okay, I think genre fans in general are quite reluctant to change. I think it's not just comic book fans. People like what they like, and they like the characters and the stories to be the ones that they grew up on, the ones that made them fall in love with the characters in the first place. And if they don't get that, be it in a film, if the film, we see it all the time, don't we? Toxic fandom. If a Star Wars film isn't quite how the fan base want it to be, or, a DC film, a Marvel film, anything, a Star Trek film, anything that's got a built-in long-standing fan base, if it's not depicted how they want it, then by God, they love letting rip. So I understand why people don't like it, because what it did was it basically revamped the entire DC universe. It didn't do away with characters per se. It did do away with some, but all your big hitters were still there. But what they did was they sort of de-aged the characters a bit. They basically started from scratch with the continuity as well. And people weren't happy about it because it was like they'd sort of tossed in the bin all those previous years' worth of continuity and storylines. So characters that were dead were all of a sudden alive and well again. And people weren't generally happy. I think people thought they'd perhaps gone a bit too dark with it. Like I say, I liked it, but hey ho, it's horses for courses, and my opinion's worth nothing more than anyone else's. So what they did was, by the time they got to 2016, they sort of made the collective decision, or the decision was made on high, that they were going to reinvent the universe, but not reinvent it like they did with New 52, where they basically hard reboot the entire universe. This was much more of a very, very soft reboot, where they didn't throw away the continuity of that world, but they sort of gently unwound it and brought back the elements that people really wanted to see, and certain characters were back in the frame who weren't back, and this was the conduit for it. This, from going from the New 52 universe to the Rebirth universe, as it was called then, is this book, which basically picks up the continuity of the New 52, and which we'll get to using sort of certain story devices, establishes a new status quo moving forward, and does a quite daring sort of approach of bringing in characters from the Watchmen universe to sort of set up a future story arc, which obviously culminated in the Doomsday Clock, which was from the same creative team of Jeff Johns and Gary Frank. But I think this is a great book. It's got all the elements that I enjoy. It's got more characters in it than you can shake a stick at. All the characters you love are in there. And I think it's just brilliantly written. I think Jeff Johns, I know there's been a lot of innuendo and accusations been made recently about his alleged conduct towards other people. And I'm only here to talk about Jeff Johns as a comic book writer, not as a person. I mean, regards all that, the truth will come out, and if what people are saying about him is true, then shame on him. It makes him out to be a pretty despicable person. And if it's not true, then I feel sorry for him having his name dragged through the mud. Yeah. So either way, the truth will come out, and then either way, we can all be judge and jury then. But I'm just here to talk about him as a comic book writer. I think he is one of the greatest active comic book writers in the world. I think consistently the stuff he puts out, like the stuff you and I have been reading, Three Jokers recently, which is his stuff, which is great. I think he's a genius level writer, notwithstanding the other side of him, which we'll see how that develops down the road. Just as a comic book writer, I think he is A level, without question, god tier writer.
It's interesting. Like I say, at this point, like you say, we'll separate artists and art for the sake of this argument. But I find that Johns, for me, I agree. I think he's great. I think he's a really good ideas man, and I do love some of the stuff he's done. And I've never read the whole thing, I have to admit, but I've dipped into like his Green Lantern run. Thoroughly enjoyed like that. Some of the ideas are fantastic. Some not so much. But like I say, that's the thing. Is it hit and miss with a lot of this stuff. But like, I love it when he does go, oh, we can do all this. And he's also a bit like we've sort of said with this with like Marvels and stuff. This dipping into the universe. Like, I would never question Jeff Johns' knowledge of the DC universe.
Oh no, not at all.
You know what I mean? Like, this guy knows his stuff. Like, he can reach back into the annals of time and bring up all kinds of things. And, it's there. It's in his head, sort of thing. He's probably to do some research, but it feels all of a piece, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So it is interesting, like you say, because I'm like you. I think the DC 52, New 52, was interesting. I think it was a brave move on their part. Didn't all pay off, like you said. Superman. I'm a massive Grant Morrison fan, and I struggle with his Superman stuff. But like Batman, Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo doing Batman. You had
it's brilliant.
When Jeff Lemire got to take a stab at Green Arrow. And, some really good stuff came out of it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But one of the good ones was Jeff Johns' Justice League.
Yes.
And so again, I was a big fan of that. I really, really enjoyed it. And so reading this, I'm like, cool, that's really cool. I love this idea of. Well, one of the things I love about the DC universe is that it's got it's got this sort of like this depth, and I don't mean by depth of history. I mean depth of mystery would be a better way of putting it, because we have all these crises and you have these things going on, and this, the fact that like Wally West gets lost in the Speed Force, and this whole book is sort of told from his perspective. It's him narrating it and telling these things. I just love this concept of you can be forgotten, but but you can also be remembered.
Yeah,
and that is such a comic book thing. There's not. I don't think there's any other medium where a character can be sort of like not written about or not really cared about for decades, and then all of a sudden, someone can write a really good book, and everyone goes, "Oh yeah, they used to be awesome," and then go back and all of a sudden they're sort of, I don't know, some old run from 20 years ago becomes a bestseller again. There's not many mediums where that can happen, and I just feel like this book taps into that idea of, look, here's all this stuff from the past and all the stuff that you know may have been forgotten, or is a different part of the world, or is a different story, and you just sort of, it's like, oh yeah, I love that. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, cool. I can't wait to read that. It's a book that constantly sort of goes, oh, that's cool. Oh, that's cool. That's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. You get, like you said about Johns' knowledge of the DC universe, you get the sense that he is a true fan of the universe and of the lore of the mythology. And like you said, his knowledge is, he is regarded as someone with a borderline encyclopedic knowledge of the history of the DC universe and Marvel universe as well, by all accounts. And yeah, it's great. He can pull out legacy characters. He's throughout his career, he's done stuff like that. When he wrote the JSA some years ago, a group that hadn't really been utilised to any great stretch the imagination in the years preceding that, but he made that a top tier book. He's done the same with other things. He's very good at taking not unloved or discarded sort of properties and characters, but ones who perhaps weren't getting their time in the sun, and putting them front and center and making them relevant again. I think that's his gift. And like you said, it's great the way he does it in this book, the way he pulls out characters that were deliberately removed from the continuity with the New 52. I mean, there's a few that appear in the course of this book, but obviously the main one is the Wally West Flash, who had been sort of removed from the continuity. And the way they come up with a reason as to why that happened, and explain where he's been, but also explain why no one remembers him, and no one's going, where's Wally been all these years? Where is he? And literally no one remembers who he is when he tries to, he goes to try and, see Batman, and Batman doesn't know who he is. He goes and sees his Linda, his ex-girlfriend, and she doesn't know who he is, and he goes to see Barry, of course, who, the one person he'd remember he is, but even he doesn't know who he is. And then just as he's about to sort of fade back into the Speed Force for all eternity, all of a sudden there's this light bulb moment, and he pulls him out and brings him back into the world. And then all of a sudden the timeline starts to get moved around again. I just think it's genius writing. I mean, what a great concept. I mean, how do you come up with something like that to go, yeah, we're going to do all that, and then we're going to go back to Flashpoint, which is what created the New 52, but in doing so, we're going to explain that this new continuity wasn't the result of Barry Allen going back in time to create the Flashpoint and save his mum from being killed. No, it wasn't that. It was, in fact, Dr. Manhattan coming over from the end of the Watchmen story to this universe, this dimension, and plucking people out of existence and altering the timeline, and removing 10 years of history from the internal timeline of the comic book stories. Just genius story, and so creative, I think.
Yeah. Oh, well, it is. I mean, the thing is, and it's this is clearly, like you say, they're fixing, or no, fixing is probably the wrong word. They are re-engineering what has gone before,
Yeah.
and setting up the future. And there's a massive balance to doing that.
Yeah.
And when I've seen this done well, and this is it done well, right? This thing of providing a jumping on point, or like almost like a junction point for a continuity. This is it done well. I think I've seen it done horrendously otherwhere, and Marvel can't seem to do it. They've done, they've done like these big number ones, haven't they? Or sort of kicking things off. And there was one, was it Marvel 1000?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
That came out either last year or the year before, and it was fine, but it just felt like a litany of 2-page stories that didn't really hang together a great deal. And I was like, I'm looking through here to see if a comic character I like is going to appear in the future. No, all right, well, I'll give it a miss. With this, Johns manages to balance this idea of teasing new stories. I mean, literally in the first 2 pages, he's teasing the 3 Jokers. I mean, this is 2016.
Yeah.
And he was teasing 3 Jokers. You get, and this goes back to obviously Rebirth. You get teased there's a new version of Superman from a different Earth.
Yeah.
You get teased. There's a couple of other things, isn't there? There's sort of like this future stories that would materialize in Rebirth are teased.
Yeah.
And other things from the past are referenced as well. So you get this notion that let's use this example of Green Arrow and Black Canary are no longer together, and it's never really been resolved in the New 52. But it also, you had a character called Pandora.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's almost like, the one thing is that gets resolved a little quickly for my taste, but sort of like they resolve that in a way as well. But one of the things I like about this is it has all that, but it also has heart. Yeah. So when you do go, look, here's a new idea about the 3 Jokers, you then get a moment of, and it's Wally West that provides it.
Yeah.
These moments of saying, like, the history of change. You get his history of becoming the Flash, and you're like, yeah, that's awesome. And the 2 that really shake me up, and whenever I read it, is there's a page. It's on a single page of the Green Arrow and Black Canary.
Yeah.
And Oliver Queen and Dinah Lance, and it's like, yeah, they've never really met. There's clearly something between them, but then the picture at the bottom is like they're on separate rooms. Yeah, and there's like they know something's missing, and you're like, oh man, yeah, get those dudes back together. Like that, they were awesome. Yeah, and it does that, and then the next page it introduces Oz, which was the Superman story, which didn't really play out for me, but it plays like this. So it puts Mera and Aquaman back together. Yeah, and as you say, one of the most heartbreaking moments in this book is when Wally reaches out to Linda, and you're thinking, I'm looking, going, I'm halfway through this book. It's the center of the book. This can't be the end. No, it's not. Yeah, it literally tears him apart. It's heartbreaking. Yeah, and then to have the payoff of as you say, of Barry Allen reaching out and literally save, and there's that moment of acceptance by Wally where he's like, I'm forgotten, that's it, I'm done. Yeah, and he manages to appear to Barry and he's like, thank you for everything. It's like a couple of pages and it's absolutely like heartbreaking, and it feels like this is just comic books written well. It's just a fantastic balance between teasing what is to come, but making you invest in it. Yeah, it is. This is the perfect jumping on point. If somebody who sort of maybe had a working knowledge of sort of DC's characters, where everyone does have, I guess these days, have a working knowledge of DC's sort of A-list characters because they're so sort of entrenched in popular culture now. But this, if you'd never sort of read anything and had a knowledge of the recent history of the DC universe, or should I say the recent history of the DC universe prior to this book in 2016, you could literally pick this up having
no real idea of where things have been going in this world prior to this point, and read this from start to finish and never feel massively sort of alienated by it. You know, you could read it and not be like, I have not got a clue what's going on. I don't know who anyone is. I don't know where they're at in the universe, what any of this means, because it does a good job of explaining it, doesn't it? It gives you history through, because Wally's taking you through this world and he's your narrator, he's your eyes almost. And you know, when you get to see his sort of interior monologue, it gives you all his backstory, obviously over a couple of pages, but then also when he goes to see other people, he explains why he's there and who they are. So although there might be the odd bit where, you know, if you were completely coming at it fresh and cold, you might be like, oh, I don't quite know what that's all about. I think generally speaking, it's a really top, which was, I guess, was the aim as well when they were doing this, of sort of closing one era and starting off a brave new one, is that you want to attract a new level of readership. And I think whether it did or not, I couldn't tell you. I don't know what the sales were, but I think, you know, looking at it as a reader, I think it does it brilliantly. Then there's like you said, there's so much intrigue in there for where we're going to go next. You know, we've set up this universe, we've established the status quo, we've established that, you know, the preceding years weren't quite right because someone meddled with them. You know, we don't know who, but there's certainly a lot of hints that this is someone we know. This is a character we know from a classic book of yesteryear. And then obviously it's confirmed with that final panel where Batman finds a little souvenir in the Batcave, and you think, Jesus Christ, they're going to do it. They're going to cross over with these characters. I mean, it's the ultimate appetite whetter, I think.
Yeah, it is. It sets up a lot of good stuff. I mean, you know, it got me. You know, I was reading less and less of the New 52 by the sort of the end.
Yeah.
And it got me back in. It definitely worked on me. And since then, you know, I read. I know I've dwindled again, I'd say, on DC a little bit, but yeah, it got me back in. I started reading Batman. I loved the Tomasi and who was it? Tomasi and Patrick Peter J. Tomasi and Patrick Gleason. I loved their Superman. Their run of Superman. You know, and I read a bunch of others. So it was a good entry point. I think it must have worked to get others on board. It's an interesting thing with comics though, because it's definitely that sort of like peaks and troughs. You know, you have something piques people's interest and then it'll tail off and, you know, sales will go down. And it's that thing of maintaining, I think, that, you know, really trying to find a way of maintaining people's attention.
Yeah, I think every so often, every few years, you have to do something like this. You know, I think sometimes both big two companies have been guilty of getting it wrong over the years. And, you know, sometimes you can have one sort of crisis level continuity altering event too many. But I just think, like you said, you've got to keep things fresh. You've got to find a new angle and a new way of looking at things. So I think every so often you need something like this, just to not throw the baby out with the bathwater, but just give things a fresh coat of paint. Yeah. I wanted to ask you actually because I know some people have sort of different opinions on this. Obviously, the introduction of the Watchmen universe into this, we learn that obviously it was Dr. Manhattan who was behind all this, and obviously we at the end there where we see the comedian's badge, and as you know, as we both read Doomsday Clock and know where ultimately this story ends. In terms of using the Watchmen characters, I know there's some people who are, you know, hardcore Alan Moore devotees who think those characters are sacrosanct, and to have them involved in this universe is borderline blasphemy. Whereas other people are you know, think it's great. I personally think it's great. You know, where do you sit on it? Were you happy to see these characters resurrected and used in this way, or were you sort of dead against it, or on the fence?
No, I was. I'm never against a good story. Yeah, is what I'd say. Yeah. If they were used cheaply, you know, and it was done poorly, then I'd be like, it's rubbish. It's a waste. You've wasted this opportunity, and that would be it. I wouldn't have been happy. The thing is, Doomsday Clock. We had the button as well, so the thing is, this wasn't straight away as well. They didn't just jump in and be like, "Here's Dr. Manhattan." They teased a bunch of other stuff as well, and because you had the button, which was the Flash and Batman, and some other bits and pieces. When it got to Doomsday Clock, I think Doomsday Clock is a good book. Took too long to come out.
Delayed far too much.
Yeah, but that's sort of in line with Watchmen as well. So swings and roundabouts. It was fine. It was good. I actually really enjoyed it. I think it was done well for the most part. I think I love Gary Frank as well. So to see it drawn in that way, it was excellent. The problem I have with a lot of it is, and this is sort of, I'm finding this a little bit with Jeff Johns at the moment. Jeff Johns is clearly an Alan Moore devotee. But I'm not sure whether he's trying to homage or rip. I don't know. It's a bit like with the Three Jokers as well. But when I read Doomsday Clock, the ending of Doomsday Clock, and spoilers for those, is obviously the introduction of that new young boy.
Yes.
Who is a super powered child created by Dr. Manhattan and all this other stuff. And you go, all right, cool. Is that ever going to come up again?
Probably not. No.
And so I'm a bit like, well, all you've done then is left it open ended. Like this should have been a closed loop. Like leave it open so you can use the characters again. No, I've got no problem with that at all. But this thing of leaving a thread dangling felt a little bit was the one thing in that book I was a bit like, I don't like that.
Yeah. But
other things in it were great. Like I loved the new Rorschach. I think his story is awesome.
Yeah.
In fact, I think he was one of my favourite pieces in it. I loved this idea of the comedian being pulled out of time just before his death. I thought that was a nice touch. No, I think it was done well, and so I didn't mind it so much. The problem was it didn't end up having the impact on the DC universe I think they intended it to, which is a bit of a problem. But no, it's a book I'll go back and read, definitely.
Yeah, I think it's a really good read. I mean, like you said, the art is wonderful. It serves the purpose of bringing back the JSA and the Legion of Superheroes at the end there, who had been gone through the New 52 years also, or gone in the traditional guises that we sort of know and love, and how they bring them back. I suppose, the universe isn't much different from how it was at the start. I do know what you mean. Yeah, I like the concept that it establishes the lack of the metaverse, where it establishes the concept that everything that's ever happened over the years is canon. But I guess because obviously we're talking like just over 80 years of history here, and the characters are kind of always preserved at that optimum age, is that somehow the metaverse sort of endlessly kind of recycles itself and reboots itself every cycle or something like that, which kind of explains why characters don't age in real time over the years, and how they're all still in the prime 80 years after they were introduced. So I kind of like that concept to it. I think there's some flaws in the execution of it, but I think it was a bold move, and I'm certainly not one of those who's like, how dare you use these characters. At the end of the day, they're DC owned. They can do what the hell they want with them.
Exactly. I mean, I won't argue that Alan Moore has got his issues, and there was a contract that said, once the Watchmen was out of print, he'd have it back. Never going to happen.
He's a victim of his own success, isn't he? That it's never been out of print.
Exactly. They're a business. They're going to use their characters. They can do with them what they want. I've got no problem with that. If it's not good, I won't read it. If it's great, I'll read it. I'm a bit of I'm happy to see it being used. Yeah. But it's all good. I think Doomsday Clock has got some really good thoughts, some bits in it. It's opened the door for other things to be done. Yeah. We're now getting Rorschach. Book, and Tom King's doing that, so awesome. That I'm not going to complain about. And so it's opened the door to things. The one thing I would say is it's a bit like with Three Jokers. 2 issues in, there's some good stuff in there, and I sort of like some of the concept of it.
Yeah.
But again, it's like this thing of like, okay, who's going to pay attention to this? How much of an impact is it really going to have? I sometimes think DC, a bit like with their film stuff as well, though, it doesn't have a level of coherency that I think it could do with when it agrees to do these things.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's like event storytelling, but somehow, not somehow, but sometimes not using it as something for the bigger picture. Telling like a big storyline. Like you said, 3 Jokers. So it's only a 3-issue series anyway, so there's only 1 issue left to complete that story. And where they've got up to with the first 2, it's been good, it's been intriguing. We're wondering where it's going, but kind of like with Doomsday Clock, they didn't leave a lot of space at the end to round the story off. They kind of spent a lot of time setting up the situation and layering on the story, but at quite a slow pace. So where you get to the end, I think of Doomsday Clock and seemingly with 3 Jokers, you're like, shit, we've got 1 issue left to tell a hell of a lot of story and tie up a hell of a lot of threads. Let's get to it and cram it in. I mean, they got away with it with Doomsday Clock. I thought the end was pretty good, but sometimes I think, with these sort of limited series, event stories, where it's a finite number of issues, sometimes they spend so long on the setup and the intrigue that they don't leave themselves enough space at the end to really, tie everything up the way you want to. But I think they get it right more than they get it wrong, I would say.
Oh yeah, they do. And again, I'm enjoying, don't get me wrong, I'm enjoying 3 Jokers. I think there's a lot to really like in there. And I think the way I like the way that he's writing writing them, they're 3 different characters.
Yeah.
And I like that, and I think that's really cool. And obviously, the art again is phenomenal. But the problem I have is I'm now reading that and I'm enjoying it. It was teased in 2016, so if you were to take that, that's in canon. That's happening.
Yeah.
So what the hell's going on with the Joker War then? Which one's that? Who's that then?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because that's just finished now.
Yeah.
And, I don't want to spoil it for anyone who's not read it, but obviously there's an end to that, and you can kind of guess who comes out on top at the end of that. Same guy comes out on top of every Batman story arc, so you can guess. Obviously, perhaps without spoiling too much, Joker don't necessarily get his own way at the end. So then, how is he still present in that? Yeah, they do tend to do that a lot, really, with the sort of periodical issues. Is that the chronology doesn't quite line up. They'll have a story involving one character in one book, and then have them in a story running concurrently in another book, and the times don't quite match up. And you're like, well, is this character dead because they're alive still in this book, or how can this character be doing this when they've just been soundly defeated in another? So yeah, I know what you mean. They sometimes, I think, get the scheduling a bit mixed up. Yeah.
So the thing is, a lot of times I don't mind it so much. Like there's little things like, oh, Wolverine is on this big event with the Avengers, but he's also doing this thing with the X-Men. I'm a bit like, that I'm not so worried about. You know what I mean? And there's things like that, like, oh, Batman's off in space in Justice League. What's he doing with this in Batman? Like, I'm not so worried about that. But when you are fundamentally changing a character to be a single, a figure of anarchy and evil, to being 3, and then you're running a major story across your 100th Batman issue, or to conclude in your 100th Batman issue called the Joker War, you sort of go, someone in editorial needs a slap, to be perfectly honest. And I think that's the problem with DC. They do that every now and then, and you go, just like, this could have been easily resolved. Anyway, I shall stop.
I think sometimes you just have to take each book in isolation, each title in isolation. You're quite right what you're saying. Like, before the Joker War, there was a run of 80 odd issues by Tom King on Batman, and at various points in that, Batman was literally like finished as Batman, and was not even in Gotham City, because again, don't want to spoil it for anyone who's not read that epic run, but like you said, at the same time as those books are being released, he was fighting alongside the Justice League against universe level threats.
Yeah,
but these are all supposed to be set in this one universe that's in this book we're talking about right now, but how can that be happening at the same time if this man is like, not even in Gotham City, and he's in hiding, and he's in a bad situation, but yet in this other book he's in the costume, he's fighting alongside all his super buddies, and doesn't seem to affect us. So yeah, it's kind of weird that, in a way, how they kind of established, specifically within this book, this is the status quo of this universe, and all these characters exist in this universe, and everything's connected. Yet one book doesn't relate to the other. Yeah, I know, it's kind of strange.
It can be, but that's comics. That's another thing you accept of comics, and like 99% of the time, I'm fine with that. But just every now and then, you're a bit like, oh, I wish they'd have just been a bit more consistent.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
But I have to say, like, the DC Universe Rebirth issue 1 is a corker. It is an introductory. It's a like you said, a soft reboot done very well.
It is, yeah.
And so I do think that Johns is very good at that. That sort of thing.
Yeah, without question, and it's endlessly readable. I mean, I've had this since it came out, so it's 4 years or whatever time of the year it came out. 2016, 4 years, 4.5 years. But I can constantly go back and reread it and not get bored of doing so, because at the end of the day, it's one issue comic book. I mean, it's an extended one. It's about 80 pages, so it's bigger than your average normal 20 odd page comic book. So there's more meat on the bone than a standard comic book, but there's just so much going on in it, and so much little bits and pieces of business in there that it's endlessly readable. I think you can go back to it every few months and have a nice read of it, and something else will grab your attention that you didn't quite grab your attention the first time. And it's like I said, it's the ultimate appetite whetter. And I'd recommend it for anyone who wants to jump in, who's not kept up with comic book events and doesn't know where to start. I'd say start here. And then pick and choose what you want to read coming out of this. Do you want to read Batman coming out of this? Do you want to read Superman? Do you want to read Green Arrow, Wonder Woman, Justice League? Whatever you fancy, you can pick and choose. Cherry pick. But I would say use this as your starting point, as your true north, if you will. Just pick this one up, read it through, enjoy it, see which characters catch your eye, which ones you're intrigued about and want to know more about. And go from there, and go through the last 4 years worth of stories, and you'll be glad you did. I mean, with everything, there's good mixed with bad. Obviously, that there's no one who consistently always knocks it out of the park, but there's plenty of great stuff been out the last 4 years that I'd recommend to anyone. So yeah, this book is great for lapsed readers or new readers who want to really immerse themselves in it. Grab it and see where it takes you, I'd say.
I totally agree. I agree with that, definitely. There's been some good stuff from Rebirth. I think Rebirth had some really top-notch stories in it as well that were thoroughly enjoyable. Yeah. Excellent. Okay, well, Max, that's been awesome. I've really enjoyed that, and thank you for sort of making me go back and read some of these comics as well, because that's one of the joys of me doing this kind of podcast. When I do these Desert Island comics, like, it makes me go and either read something I'd never read before, or I go back and read things I've read and I really enjoy. So it's always fun. So thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Thank you for having me. It's been a treat for me too to think of something to pick up for reread myself. And yeah, it's been a treat. It's been, like I say, an honour to be invited on, and a treat for me too to go and read these. So thank you. Yeah.
Great. I enjoyed it. Okay. Well, again, people can find you where? Where can people find you and your podcasts?
Yeah, well, you can find me on Twitter at Maxi Byrne, which is spelled MAXYBYRNE. Find me on there. And if you look at that page, there's links there to the different websites I write articles and reviews for, so you can check those out, see what's going on. And there's a link on there to the Comics in Motion podcast feed, which my show goes out on, along with a litany of others. Now there's a whole host of different shows on that network, and whatever your taste, I think there'll be something for your fancy there. Yourself, Scott, make regular appearances on a lot of those shows too, so it's all good stuff. So by all means, check it out there. My show is Mandatory Marvel and DC, but I'm just a very small part of a much bigger thing, so check it out. I think you'll be glad you did.
I agree. Yeah, just find Comics in Motion on your podcast catcher, and there are multiple Wonderful podcast going out at the moment. Almost daily now, I think, isn't it? Like at least sort of 5
Pretty
days
much,
a week.
yeah. 5 or 6 days a week, a new episode drops on a different sort of topic and a different show by different hosts. So yeah, and as far as I'm aware, it won't be too long before there's probably something for every day of the week. So yeah, it's plenty of good value on there. So yeah, if you're into it, get on it. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, Max, it's been a joy, and I'm sure I'll have you on again someday. But for now, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, just a quick note that Max has been in contact since the show, and there is Marvel's Eye of the Camera. This is an extension of this universe in which Sheldon does experience things through the 70s and 80s and beyond. So if you do want to see more of this, go find that. It's Marvel's Eye of the Camera. That's a sequel to Marvel's. Not read it yet myself, but I probably will check it out. But beyond that, thank you very much for listening. As always, I appreciate all our listeners and supporters. If you want to find us on the Twitter, it's at 20th Century Geek. If you've got comics you think we should be checking out and you'd want to recommend us talking to, let us know. Find us there on at 20th Century Geek, or email me 20thcenturygeek@gmail.com. You can also find me on Facebook and Instagram, all under 20th Century Geek. And if you like what we're doing, don't forget we have a Patreon page where I do a monthly podcast called 30-Minute Thoughts. People get to choose what I talk about, and then I give my thoughts for 30 minutes. And that we've also introduced what I'm calling the Quarterly Creator Corner. Every quarter, that's 4 times a year, I track down or I sort of bring on a creator to come and talk about their craft and projects they're doing at the moment. So please come and check that out. So anyway, in the meantime, thank you very much for listening, and have a good time, and I'll see you on the next episode.